Oh man. All right. Hey everyone. This is just Lord Artorius Collbrande. I call myself that after one of my favorite one of my favorite characters. Today I just kind of was having a bit on my mind because I wanted to talk about a show that I personally need have the want in myself to talk about in a more critical angle and want to give a critical perspective on. I believe that this show, which is named Tengen Toppa Gurren Lagann, is not really given much of a critical eye and much of a given critical thought, among the creators, most of the creators on YouTube. And I'm very sorry that this is a low-quality production video, but unfortunately, this is the best way I could talk about on YouTube for a little while about how I feel about the show. I'm sorry I can't show you anything because YouTube won't allow that. Right, with what I'm able to use, but I'm just going to talk about from just a different perspective of why I dislike the show. Personally, I think the show's biggest problem is that it's very over the top. I feel like the show is very annoying. It sexualizes its female characters too much. And I feel like the biggest problem with the whole show really is that the show is very negative in how it portrays its characters growing up. And the way how it tones its ideas is it tries to be very dark with it. And it's not fitting for the story because there's no positive growth of the main character and ends up becoming negative. And the show is poorly written because it really just copies its first two episodes over on top of each other. To kind of give some context for what I'm talking about, in the first episode, it's actually shown when Kamina and Simone have like a bit of a conversation with each other that Kamina tells him to not really worry about what those ugly chicks say about him because they were being mean to Simone for no reason. But my problem with that isn't that isn't really it by itself. In the first episode, you kind of see a bit of an okay idea. And I understand that not everybody's going to like you in your life, and I get that, from that perspective. But the show is too one-dimensional with that idea, and I feel like since the show is like dark and just has these grim moments where it just taints all over it, it ruins the potential of the show having the message that it's trying to present as its theme, and the story ends up becoming annoying, really. It becomes negative and it ends up creating something entirely different than what it's trying to present as an argument for the main character. Because at the very end of the show, now I'm not going to go over every single detail of why I think the show is bad from my perspective, because I could be here really for hours, and I would rather talk about it as a whole when I actually would have the ability to do that by showing everything, showing every single scene that I can think of. But my problem with the ending of the show is that when Nia dies, it just kind of shows that the characters are just worried about Simone and that he's just kind of too weak to actually save her. And I feel like it creates this negative thing where the character just grew up to really be nothing in the world and have nothing in the end, which I think is bad for the story, really, because the whole point of growing up, really, in all honesty, it just doesn't fit being a coming-to-age story, and that's the problem. When you take that into account, that's what really ruins the show. And Yoko is also a big problem with the show, too, because her role is really just being sexualized. And the fact that she's just passed around some of these characters, like first with Kamina, and later on in the show with Kitan, before he also dies. And Kamina's death is what triggered me the most in the whole entire show, because it created this problem where there wasn't really much memorable with this character before he died. And they show some scenes after, like, before the last episode, in the 26th episode, where none of that even came into context or any play before Kamina died. And it just felt really weird and just poorly written with the rest of the show. The fact that Simone also had a crush on Yoko and Kamina just dies after just kind of making him just sit there watch, just kind of also has that continues that point that I feel like the fact that they just copy the ideas in the first 2 episodes over again, it becomes extremely annoying with the rest of the show. Because the show becomes unnecessarily dark, and it becomes grim. Look, I have no problem with someone who likes this show, but I'm just speaking from my perspective and why I personally hate it. I wouldn't personally give it like actually a 0 out of 10, but I would probably give it a 1 or a 2. And that's being honest. I think it's a very tainted, very bad, poorly written show. And I think there's a lot of problems that I feel like most people are too afraid to speak up about in the show, which is why I'm on the internet and I'm going to speak up about it and talk about what I think other people have not discussed about the show yet as critical problems that the show has. People who like Gurren Lagann, I think that's perfectly fine. And I'm not like those people who are just jerks and are gonna tell people that they can't speak their mind and feelings about the show. I think that's perfectly fine if you're someone who enjoys it. I think there's a bit of likable stuff sprinkled throughout the show, but because the show has poor direction and really has no idea what it's really doing with its plot, really, it just becomes this silly mess, and it becomes a ridiculous show that really has no message with its characters. Yet it's trying to take itself seriously, and people are trying to say that it's this life-changing show when it's really just silly nonsense. Kamina is one of my least favorite characters. I think, a lot of people try to say that they really like his character. And I think, maybe he's just a little bit cool in a couple of scenes. You can see a bit of a promise with his character. But the problem is that he's such an idiot. And even in the first episode, he's a pervert. And he just makes these really rude comments about Yoko. And when he dies, like literally in the 8th episode, that was a really triggering moment because it made the characters have to move on. Even though I think it's fine to teach that the characters have to move on because we do have to put up with death sometimes, and I get that. You could try to argue that perspective. The problem is that we didn't really actually know much about him, and his character was just scrunched all together in 8 episodes. They should have, if these characters were going to die, they could have made them die later on in the show, and that would have been better for the whole premise of the plot. It would have made it more impactful, and we would have gotten more moments before they died and more development for these characters. And I think that's the biggest reason why I hate this show and why I personally think that Gurren Lagann is a bad series. Because ultimately, it taints its premise based on the fact that it just wants to be this grim, dark show, really, when that's not fitting for what it's trying to be as coming to age, if that makes sense. The characters are unlikable, they're annoying, they're over the top. The characters sometimes go ballistic with how they act. And it's stupid. I look at some of the art in the show and I hate it. But this is going to be the ending of the video. I hope, I'm glad that you were able to at least understand where I was coming from. And I hope you have a good day. And thank you for at least understanding my own perspective and why I just disagree with the majority of people who talk about it. Thank you. And I'm very open for discussion. Thank you and have a good day.